welcome to the Gospel Jazz. May the peace of the Lord be upon you and your family. We are here for some conversational improv through life, leadership, and Jesus. And we had a plan, and I wrecked it 20 minutes ago. So,
as is
normal.
Two of us were not surprised.
That's what. What do you mean? Three of us weren't. I'm never surprised. What do you...
That was after you showed up.
Yeah. Okay. Stop. Okay. So, you guys have been a little more deep dive on this than I have. I'm just getting kind of caught up to speed. But Christianity Today, I don't know how long ago did they start putting out these podcasts?
Yeah.
Was okay? So
late spring or early summer.
I'm only a few months behind. But
Sounds about right.
the rise and fall of Mars Hill, and again, I think it's relevant. And I was a little skeptical going into it. I'm always weary about people's motivations, and I forget who the guy is that even does this for Christianity Today, but he had worked at Mars Hill. He'd worked with Mark Driscoll. Obviously, I think everything we've seen here the last 4 or 5 years in our politics and just cult of personalities and things of that nature, that it shouldn't surprise us, right? That has infected the church, right? And so I was a little, I thought, man, is this guy going to be kind of gossipy? Is he going to be, and again, kind of as you said, this is, again, for those that know or are in the know, I mean, it's all public knowledge, right? I mean, this isn't, and again, not just because something's public knowledge doesn't mean that it can't be gossipy, but,
really, the issue is how we talk about it.
Sure.
Distinguishes it from gossip or something that has the potential to be helpful.
Yeah.
And largely what this guy has done, I forget his name
I know.
as well.
That's how prepared we are.
But largely what he does, he says, look, this is something that needs to be talked about. Not just in context of those who were hurt and wounded by what happened, but so that we might not make the same mistakes.
Because, I mean, and one of the things I think he's done a pretty good job of, I mean, he's obviously focused more in the latter years, but, every now and then in an episode, he'll go back to those early years of Mars Hill, that you go, here was a church that was started in Seattle, Washington, of all places, fairly conservative, right? Pretty hard-hitting, no holds barred, and again, and I think part of it, you see that get only worse with the tactics, I think that are employed, but, and you hear the testimony of some people who were there in the early years, right? Of just going, man, our marriage was saved, right? Our souls were saved, right?
People who were completely disenfranchised or disconnected. Yeah. I mean, they really connected with the grunge thing that was happening largely out of the Seattle area, and people who would have had nothing to do with church in its traditional setup. And yet somehow Mars Hill speaks into those lives.
There was an older couple that gave a testimony that said, we brought our teenage boys to church service, and they were engaged, and they sang along with the songs, and they listened to Mark preach for an hour. I mean, just think about that, right? You got teenagers that they can listen to me probably for 5 minutes, let alone 55 minutes, And so, and then there was another story, one of the last episodes. So I think there's 8 episodes out right now. Right?
Yes, there are more coming.
Well, so let's say this: we're recording this end of August.
Yes.
Kind of out of sequence with our series, but there's a reason for that. We always wanted to talk about this season.
Yeah.
So our focus this season is kind of leadership in a changing world, right? Kind of some adaptive leadership, being some family systems theory, self-differentiation, and then kind of talking through ideas of Tov. And what does it mean to be a Tov culture versus a toxic culture? So we were going to kind of have some conversations about this all along and use it as maybe a way of illustrating some of these ideas. So we're recording this now. There's 8 episodes. There's 5 more to be released. We're kind of just debriefing that.
And I'm only through episode 5,
right.
I think. So
we don't know entirely when we're going to release this episode.
Sure.
But it's going to be in the context of this bigger conversation.
Yeah. This is what's really fresh in our minds right now.
Yeah.
As we're going through this. And that was, again, one of the other episodes I just listened to, I think yesterday. He talks about a lady whose husband was having major surgery, was going to be in the hospital days, and they're at that time, Mark and his wife and family were living like a block away from the hospital, and so this lady was welcomed into his home, right, and pulled out the sofa bed, and that's where she stayed for a week, and to me, to hear those stories and go, yeah, so how do we move from that to as the story that you just shared with one of the latest episodes that you listened to, with where they're, I don't know if I've let you talk about filming on location and
some of without being too specific, some of the difficulty is the way that leadership, and again, I mean, pointing the finger at what is known.
Yeah.
Mark used his position of leadership to manipulate circumstances and individuals for his benefit.
Yeah.
And that is an ongoing, that is not up for dispute. That is not something people go, well, I think you got some of the details wrong. No, those are the details. Those are the details. It is inescapable that pattern continues. And I don't know, I know Mark has another church now in another part of the country, and my prayer is that he is healthy, mentally and emotionally, and he is no longer practicing that kind of stuff. Yeah. But the truth is, it did happen. So it is important to acknowledge that those stories that are told, and I don't know if we have to rehearse everything because it's already out there in that podcast, but man, it is so disturbing to see how, and this is the tension. This is one of the things that the host kind of talks about several times, is the tension that exists between the good fruit that is being that is coming out and the means that got there. Because, and again, this is something that is said a couple of times, that Mark would do just enough to keep whomever he was kind of wanting to stay around, so they would stay around. One of the guys that he interviews was a tech guy, and he was coming into Mars Hill and asked to be hired by Mars Hill at an early stage when MP3s were just hitting the market. And he was like, well, we can put all of these messages on these little files and get them out there, and even get your videos. I didn't know this. Mars Hill and Mark Driscoll's video sermons, were among the first to hit when the iPod video first hit the market. Yeah. This was this kid's idea, going, hey, this thing's about to break. We could put this here. Oh, interesting. And he said, look, I know that I could have made more money in the secular market. And he says, looking back now, I'm like, what was I doing? But Mark gave him like an unprecedented. I mean, he had the latest tech gear. He wasn't getting paid a whole lot, but he had the latest. He had the latest cool studio. Everything that this kid asked for, Driscoll said, "Yeah, okay." And he looks back and says, "Now that was kind of manipulative to keep me around, because I'm not getting paid a lot, but man, I'm getting to use all the latest, toys. Coolest stuff." Yeah, unbelievable stuff. There was a high-end camera that was out, and I don't know what year this was, but he said. NBC, the local NBC station, had one of those. We had two at the church. I can't even begin to imagine how much those things cost. But
that's crazy.
Blown the budget out.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, yeah.
Well, and to me, and I think the takeaway is, right, because I think, probably none of us, and the vast majority of people who ever listen to this, or pastor friends we know, none of us are going to have mega churches, and But there's a lesson to be learned, right? Because even on a micro scale, right, of going, right, how do I treat my volunteers, right? How do I treat my leadership team? Am I actually listening to them, right? And to me, and I think that's where some of the biggest breakdowns come, is that you see one guy that holds all the power, and nobody's allowed to speak into him, and again, I keep coming back to David. David had his Nathan, who could call him out and say, I don't care if you're the king, God's anointed, whatever, you're wrong. Right. You're wrong, you've sinned. And again, and what do we see? We see David's response. He immediately, right, repents. And now there's still consequences, right? There's still consequences to his sin. And then, later, I think it's with Absalom, where, he ends up, I don't remember if he puts to death all of David's advisors, but he certainly doesn't listen to him. And the whole kingdom kind of falls into disarray. And that was one of the episodes I listened to. Same thing. They had tried to gather some godly men around Mark, and it just he didn't want to listen. And so to me it's, well, yes, this big story is tragic. You go, what's my takeaway? Right. My takeaway is for here, St. Louis, Michigan, Gratiot County.
Mm-hmm.
Better be minding my P's and Q's, I mean, and not falling into those same traps on a smaller level.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, and I think it's, thinking about the cultures we're creating in our churches, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There was a culture created, not just by Mark, but by Mark and the leaders, that was toxic, right? That there's story after story after story in this podcast series where there are people recounting how they were manipulated. There's a couple of pastors who are also elders on the leadership team or the board who are basically told either resign or right now, or we're going to launch an investigation. They said, bring on the investigation. There's anything wrong. So they get an investigation. The team who's investigating them, which includes Mark, they find no wrongdoing. But rather than telling these two that, they let them come into a meeting under false, presuppositions, and defend themselves, and then say, "Well, we actually didn't find anything wrong after all. What are you so upset about?" Right? So there's this culture that is not unique to Mark Driscoll.
Yeah.
That is not unique to Mars Hill. And so thinking about the kind of cultures we're creating within our churches, do we can we be repentant, like you were talking about? Mm-hmm. Are there people around us who can speak truth into our lives? Yep. Are we willing to hear hard things from others that we might not like? Or do we shut that stuff down? Are we allowing people to speak honestly, or do we make them keep our secrets?
Sure.
Why? One of the things that happens in a lot of, I think, bigger churches, but not only, we get people signing NDAs. What in the world could be happening in a church where you need to sign a non-disclosure agreement? I mean, nothing good.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Right.
And I look at that stuff and I go, is this really what the church was created to be?
Mm-hmm.
And we're doing this stuff in Jesus' name.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there is kind of this moment that they recount, some of the staff recounts in there where they realized we're not working and ministering in the name of Christ anymore. We're working in the name of Mark Driscoll.
Yeah. Oof.
And
or
I think
substitute any other name of leader. Yeah. And one of the things that he talks about briefly is that this is not a big church problem. This is a leadership problem. Yeah. This happens I was just talking with my mom about this yesterday, and she says, this is not just a big church with a big staff problem and a huge budget. This happens in small churches too.
It does.
Where a leader gets on his or her high horse and you better do what I say and becomes abusive and manipulative. It is a people problem. It's not a big church problem.
It is. I mean, and another big church, but they talk about James McDonald in Harvest Bible Chapel.
Yep.
They talk about Bill Hybels and Willow Creek a little bit. I mean, these are things that have happened in a lot of different places. Mm-hmm. And it comes down to the kind of character and culture we're cultivating within our own hearts and the hearts and lives, of our churches. It can happen anywhere.
Yeah.
And it's part of the struggle with, a charismatic leader. And if you kind of get to the point where you think you're the one, everything rises and falls on you.
Yeah.
There's a struggle there. I mean, we have to remember, and this is, I think, where we're so influenced by a prosperity gospel that we don't even know often how to articulate. We forget that our Lord was crucified as a political threat, as a political revolutionary.
Yeah.
He was a refugee as a child. He grew up in squalor. from a town in which they said, could anything good come from Nazareth,
Yep.
right? He spent his life in ministry really in poverty, and is ultimately crucified as a political revolutionary at the hands of some abusive, manipulative religious leaders, right? And if we're willing to look critically at the church, who do we more often resemble, right? That disenfranchised, crucified Messiah, or the political leaders who are pulling every string they have to maintain their own power. I think so. As we talk about our conversation with this, and we could sit around and talk about the podcast, everything that happened, but I think for us to wrestle with, what does it mean for us to embrace the Jesus who is, in our context, because that's what Mark Driscoll frankly failed to do, and so many others failed to embrace the Jesus who is. They embraced a evangelical understanding of him that says, "Come follow me, and all your troubles will wash away."
Sure. This is years ago. I watched some videos from Haiti, and it was a voodoo ceremony, and the same thing. The lead kind of priest or pastor or whatever, he kind of goes into this trance, and then he starts rebuking this guy because he was a drunk, and on the surface you go, well, man, that's really good, right? I mean, he's telling this guy, trying to get his life together, right? I mean, and I think there was some physical rebuking to what's going on, and you're like, but what spirit did you tap into, right, to either gain that knowledge about that guy, and so it's one of those things where, again, as we said, right, the surface looks good, it looks fine, but what did you do to get there? What were the means that you did to arrive there? And I think that's just because they play quite a few clips from some of Mark's sermons and things, and I find myself going, is that the Spirit of Christ, right? Is that the voice, right, of the shepherd? And again, I know Jesus did. He had harsh words for people. There's a time and a place, and again, I don't know. It's
I think one of the things that I wrestle with it is the dynamics of power. Right? And then that's really what happens in those situations, like what you're talking about. It's voodoo ceremony, or these, who has power and how are they wielding that power over the powerless, right?
And that really is a huge conversation in our culture right now. There's a lot of issues coming to the forefront about power and influence and who holds it and who's the victim of it.
Right. And that's what, in the stories we hear about Mars Hill, and again, James McDonald at Harvest Bible Chapel, Bill Hybels, Willow Creek, and the list could go on. It is about, oftentimes, white men. And I'm not trying to make this political statement. It's just a description of what is, right? Who have power and wield it over people who are powerless.
And when it is threatened to be taken away from them, whether the threat is real or perceived, the backlash is
huge.
Unreal.
And it's, whether that's, you think about some of those examples and, the sexual impropriety that takes place. Bill Hybels had all kinds of power. He had this incredible character, or perceived to be. He felt like he was untouchable, and he could do anything to these women. As an example, and we come back to that picture of Jesus, who has, in theory, all the power in the world, out in the universe, right, and considers that something not to be held on to, sets it all aside to identify with the
pushes
powerless,
away from using that power at every turn.
Absolutely. Identifies with the powerless, dies as one who was powerless at the hand of those who are wielding their power over others. And so again, we think about in the church, how can we say we're doing ministry or working in Jesus' name if we're using positions of power to abuse people who are powerless. And yet that's what happens. And again, this isn't a big church problem, right?
Yeah.
There are churches within
a people
every
problem.
community who do this.
So this is funny. You know, we've taken a family vacation the last 4 summers. Same place, Greenville, Tennessee, and I think it's actually Greenville County. I looked this up years ago, so I mean the stats might be a little different now, but essentially about the same size as Gratiot County. You know, 60,000 people, whatever. Gratiot, 50, I don't know, whatever it is.
Gratiot's 40.
Is it only 40? Here, I don't know. So same thing. Greenville is not, but it's a similar size, right? And I think here, at least in the 2010 census, we had 80 some odd churches, 82, 83. That was probably pretty generous because probably dozens of those churches are whatever. But Greenville County, they had almost 300 churches.
Wow.
And so, well, that, you know, that's part of it too. But again, you go, how many of that is just somebody's little power structure that they've, you know, because you see this is the full gospel Baptist missionary. Well, we're the first full gospel Baptist, and you're like, oh my goodness, man.
Yeah.
And, you know.
Yeah, because I've been down through there. I've been to that place.
Yeah.
And every hill crest, every turn, like, there's another church. There's another church. And it's these small little cracker box buildings.
Yep. And I think we talked to one of the ladies down there that runs that. I think she told us, well, you just got a lot of churches are just kind of family.
Yeah.
And you know, and again, that just may be the culture, and that's. But again, you have that power or authority or position, and are you using it as Christ would use it? Or are you gonna?
Or you're just creating a little kingdom and putting Jesus' name on it.
Yeah. And it doesn't just happen in churches. I mean, this could really get controversial, but one of their books that I've read this year has messed with me is Jesus and John Wayne. And you know, the subtitle in this, Kristen Kobes Demuth writes this book, and she says, the subtitle is How White Evangelicals Have Co-opted a Faith and
Corrupted a nation.
Corrupted a nation, something like that, right? Or corrupted a nation and corrupted a faith. I think it's vice versa. And again, she's not saying that this is an issue of race. She's saying it has been white Christian leaders because, I mean, and this is one thing to learn from our black brothers and sisters, their experience in Christian American evangelicalism is not ours.
No, that's right.
And they don't have some of that same history. It really has been largely white. And so she just talks about those power dynamics in how we have had conversations about what Christian manhood looks like and the roles we take within our own families. Oftentimes, they're used as a positions of power.
Yeah.
Well, and so when we have it happening in our churches, we have it happening in our homes, we have it happening in our communities, and again, you can't help but look and go, but what does this Jesus of Nazareth, right? This one who lived briefly and died violently, but rose victoriously. Where does he fit into that?
Well, and that's what I think you see part of Mark Driscoll's just whole tenor and demeanor. I think is a response to, and again, right, this is just I think the ebb and flow of things. I think this is we keep talking about tension, but right as we'll just keep being controversial, you know, as you have a continued push of feminism, you know, there has been, in my personal opinion, this is not the politically correct term, a wussification of people, and especially of men and young boys. And so again, I think Mark Driscoll captured on something there, right? We need to encourage our men to be men, right? To take some ownership of themselves. And again, I think all that's all well and good, but yeah, when you then push that to some other level where and again, I don't know where that line is, but again, some of the stories that are being told, you're like, like I said, hey, you have a private meeting just for the guys of your church, and you want to encourage them to not look at porn, not abuse their wives, to be good husbands, to be good fathers.
Start being the spiritual leaders of our household.
Dude, sign me up. But do we need all the profane language? Do we need some? I mean, it was a Fight Club mentality of going. And as much as I love that movie,
it's not a good model for church.
It's not a good model. Right? Yes.
And you're right. There is a cultural aspect to this, right? And and Mark Driscoll was kicking against something, right?
Yeah.
Just like people today are kicking against Mark Driscoll and some of those other
Sure.
leaders, right? And you're right. I mean, there has been this weird shift within our. I don't say weird, but and I don't know if it's necessarily what it is. I mean, rise of feminism, whatever. But
That's probably just one aspect.
Well, it's
just one
but,
aspect.
Just think about sitcoms of the last 30 years, right? In the 70s, you had All in the Family, the Archie Bunker, and some of those kind of movies, right, or shows. You get to the 90s, and these men, the paternal figures, husbands, fathers, they're all inept who couldn't do anything but scheme, and plot against their wives apart from them, right? And there is this
the idiot husband model.
Yes, I mean, and it's everywhere, and that makes for great television.
Hilarious.
But it does form something within culture, and so you're right. You do have guys going, well, we've got to man up from this stuff. And there's an element of truth to that.
Yeah.
But we have to hold into tension. Again, what our culture does is its own thing.
Sure.
What we do as the people of God, we have to hold into tension all of those movements and those pendulum swings with what do we see Jesus of Nazareth doing?
Well, and that was the thing too. Again, and I don't know what Mark Driscoll had against Promise Keepers or whatever, but you hear him. I mean, I've already heard that a couple times,
rails
just
against
bashing on them. But I'm thinking, I think the one story of Promise Keepers where the guy goes back. I think he was a grandfather, and the same thing brings his family together, his kids, his grandkids. It washes everybody's feet. Mm-hmm. It says, right, I'm gonna do a better job of loving you guys, better job of serving. I'm thinking, that's biblical. That looks like Jesus. That sounds like Jesus. And
I was listening to something the other day on that very passage, and how Jesus gets up from the table and some of the significance of getting up from the table.
Okay.
Or the tables we need to get up from, because there's some things happening there that are cultural, right? What's happening at the table is cultural. It's not, and so getting up from the table and washing feet, and she talked about this. Instead of what if during the beginning of the worship wars we had just the people. This is her illustration. Those who wanted screens washed the feet of those who wanted hymnals. How would things be different? I mean, fill in the blank to anything we're facing in our culture today. In your culture within your church, is your pastor a foot washer, right, or a tyrant? I mean, I don't know. I mean. Is as a husband, are you a foot washer?
Yeah.
Right? As a father, or as a mother, as a wife. Yeah. I mean, what is our posture in this world? Because, again, what do we see Jesus of Nazareth doing?
Yep. Right.
He washes the feet. And I'm not sure that's something that we quite grasp the magnitude of. What it was to be washing somebody's feet.
Because in our culture we dismiss it because I don't really like feet, and I don't like my feet, and I didn't wash my feet, and my feet always stink, and so we just kind of dismiss the whole thing because we're all hung up on the feet. And Jesus made it very clear: it's not about the feet, you dopes. It's about something more than that. But we're all like, oh, feet, that's weird. Or
it was the ultimate picture of sacrifice. And
that's a cultural thing. They had sandals on. They walked everywhere. Yeah. But to me, again,
go scrub the underside of somebody's car. I guess that could be. I mean,
there you go.
Well, I still think it's. I think we've probably maybe all done this in our youth ministry days. Slacker, not a youth minister.
I did an internship.
I did an internship. Oh, yeah. No, just
years of...
I've done that.
I jumped right into the big leagues.
That's
right?
Yeah. I did that a couple times with the youth group and the youth staff, and I'm telling you what, everybody, years later go, man, that night was awesome.
Yep.
That was really meaningful. But, again, the context, right? What's happening? There's a power struggle going on there because they're all arguing. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to sit at the right hand. You're going to sit at the left hand. I'm going to be the infrastructure minister. I'm going to be the economics minister.
And the power struggle even continues when it gets to Peter. You're not going to wash my feet. I say I'm going to wash your feet. Okay, then wash all of me. And Jesus goes, you're missing the point. You dope.
Yeah.
There's something else that's kind of interesting that is another talking point through the Mars Hill podcast. And he talks about the trouble of Christian celebrity. and how we are a culture addicted to celebrities.
Yep.
We will make people famous for doing nothing more than being famous. I mean,
look at social media.
right, yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. So, and this has migrated, unsurprisingly, probably, at least it should be to us, it has migrated its way into the church and created all kinds of problems, because the very first episode in the Mars Hill podcast is Who Killed Mars Hill? And he says right from the beginning, I love the way that some of these conversations are structured and the way that the story is told. He lets the cat right out of the bag. He says it's not just on one person. Yeah. If you want to blame Mark Driscoll, go ahead. There's blame for him. Yep. But he said all of the people in the church, and he really then turned it back on us and said, really, this is us. This is our problem.
We all do.
We allow this to happen because we love celebrities. We love somebody who gets famous and is like shot out of a cannon and is, trailing, a rainbow and sparklers out of their rear end. And it's, oh my word, let's follow him. You mentioned this before we started recording, that anytime a new pastor or Christian leader writes a book, we all go, that's the best thing ever. Yeah. Let's all do that. Because we love celebrities. Yeah. And we as a people have to stop doing that thing, elevating people to positions that they are not equipped to handle, they are not mature enough to handle, or simply just stop. Just stop. Does this reflect the totality of Jesus? If it does, okay, great. But don't worship that person who wrote that book or preached that sermon or showed up at some conference. Stop it.
Yeah. It's, I think deep down, especially in its leaders in the church, we all want to be influencers, right?
Yeah.
We want to have a positive influence.
Yeah.
And you see that and you go, maybe that could be me.
Sure.
I mean, think of the impact, think of the influence. Well, how great would it be to stand before God or to whatever, and just know that you really had, and we have to remember, that is not the work. I mean, some of this greatest influence might be done one person at a time, behind the scenes. I mean, again, just think about what we see Jesus doing.
Yeah.
His greatest influence was washing feet.
Yep.
Of his disciples.
So let's just press pause on the irony of us saying this. Here are three white guys doing a podcast that goes out to the internet super universe, and just be willing to admit the irony of the conversation we're having with the position that we hold.
Yep, absolutely.
And again, I think we talked about this beforehand as well. Being willing to check your motivations and having people around you that are... One of the things that comes out in the podcast is having enough people around you that are willing to say no to you. Mm-hmm. Do you get told no? When you are in decision-making places and you throw out your opinion, does everybody kind of sit on their hands and go, well... I'm not going to say anything? Or do you have somebody that is willing to challenge you? Now, granted, that can be a source of frustration and the pain in the butt. Mm-hmm. If that person is always saying no, we don't have to think very hard about who that might be in our own lives. But is there someone who, in the lives of leaders, are willing to challenge you and say, I don't know if that's the best idea. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's what we should do. Or does everybody just kind of go, well, he or she said it. I guess we're going that direction. Yeah. I don't know if I believe in that direction, but I guess that's where we're going.
Yeah.
It's a heavy work we're called to.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So,
just back to the racial component, and I think we brought this up maybe in a podcast before, but I think it was 2014 or 15. A lot of those guys, they did a big thing called the elephant in the room, or whatever, and it was T.D. Jakes, and he wasn't really laughing at the guys, but he chuckles a little bit. He says, you guys are talking about things. He says, and the word he used, he says, we don't have the luxury, to worry about.
That was a very interesting conversation.
And I just thought, wow, because they get it. Hey, in our neighborhoods, we've got to band together. We've got to work together. It's not about your church being better than my church. All these things. So but well, I think that's been a good conversation.
Yeah.
All right. Excellent. Thanks for tuning in, and hit like, hit subscribe, and Jake
says bye.
Jake,